I want to talk about the Hunter x Hunter Chimera Ant Island Arc. I'm breaking this arc into probably about thirds. So this video will cover episode 76 to episode 96 because it's a 60 episode arc. So there's a lot to talk about, and I don't want to try to fit all of that into one super long video. So the first third of this arc has been really good. I'm really glad that the tone got a lot more serious from the Greed Island arc, much more similar to the York New City arc. This arc really commits to having balls, at least for the first third. It does not shy away from killing people. It's brutal. And the story progresses pretty quickly, which was a concern for me knowing that the arc was 60 episodes. Even though this video only covers episode 96, I'm on episode 109 right now. And I will say it is a bummer that Kurapika and Leorio have just vanished from the story. We've also had no Hisaka sightings recently, which is always a bummer since he's been great the whole series when he's in it. But we do get introduced to Kite, and I like Kite. He's been pretty interesting. Of course, he reinforces once again that Jing, Gon's dad, is a giant piece of shit and the supreme deadbeat.
Le who? The her.
But I like his fighting style, and he's just really cool. And his weapon is pretty interesting. From a writing perspective, I think having the monsters be chimeras is genius. It's set up in a way that allows them to evolve rapidly, so they're a very serious threat, while also allowing for a lot of variety. Because obviously, the way that it works in the show is the queen eats something, and then whatever kind of ant she poops out is a mixture of whatever she's been eating. So this really allows for pretty much any type of monster-esque thing that you want to fight can be created this way. We do also get a little training arc in here, which again, I think reinforces my criticism of how the Greed Island one was handled. Where in this one, it's sort of just blended in as part of the story again, and it's not super long. Our characters are put in a situation where they need to power up quickly, so it's definitely necessary. So let's just go through the arc, or at least the first third of it. Once again, the first episode of this arc introduces us to Kite and reinforces Jing being a colossal piece of shit, because we find out that if Gon used the card to bring a friend, it would send him to Kite instead of his dad, which is a completely arbitrary punishment that Gon couldn't possibly know about or account for. If you want to be really generous and assume that his dad thought that Gon would be super young, like obviously he'd have friends. But really this setup is just to get Kite to take Gon and Kahlua under his wing. We get to see the ants and he explains how dangerous they are. And then we know right away that if the ants spread, they're essentially a global threat to humanity. And I like the way this is set up in the episode also with the Chimera Ant Queen, is she's just kind of eating in the background. We have no idea where she is. She's obviously hidden away in a cave somewhere, but you can see it's just kind of a looming threat that's building in the darkness, which is a really good way to set up for a massive scale battle. And by placing it in this country that's anti-technology, they have a pretty good excuse for the threat building without being detected or communicated to anybody else on the outside. The next episode kind of just functions to introduce us to Kite's team. He explains that they're researchers kind of doing their thing. They're all amateurs, and we see this giant Chimera ant arm. And this is sort of the first red flag for them to be like, this thing must be fucking huge, probably big enough to eat a person. So right away, you're like, oh shit, giant fucking ants are going to be eating people, which is one of the worst things, most horrifying things I think most people could imagine, would just be giant man-eating insects.
Ooh, let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
And this also gives them a good excuse for some exposition. They can let the researchers talk about how when the queen eats things, that her babies are reflective of what she eats, and she can eat multiple species, and they kind of combine and branch out. And then it gives us the birth rates, which is 1 to 5 eggs per feeding, and that these will be soldiers, and the first couple egg layings won't really have mindful soldiers, but that they will evolve the longer that she feeds and grows and develops and has eggs and kids, offspring, whatever you want to fucking call them. Gross ass ant mutation chimeras. And they also drop this right up front too, that she wants to have a king and give birth to the next king and queen of the next generation so that they can continue spreading in mass numbers. And he also kind of offhandedly mentions that anything that she particularly likes to eat, she could feed on until extinction. And since they want strong organisms, obviously this will be humans, and obviously the hunters will be kind of the high value meals. So it really fits a lot in with these first couple episodes as far as setup, especially for how long this arc is. And then of course we get a sad story that leads to its own pretty interesting plot line where these two little kids get eaten and give birth to one of the first more intelligent ants, and he ends up naming himself Colt. And I actually really like his plot line. I'm curious to see where it goes, because where I'm at now in the story, he hasn't actually been around for a while. And we can see here that the first ant with human genes was born, and now we're going to get intelligent human ant chimeras, which is scary as shit, because they'll obviously have the intelligence of humans at least, and physically they'll be far superior. I'm assuming this is based on our ants on Earth, where ants have a crazy amount of strength proportionate to their body, and they are relatively tough for their size. And as we carry on to the next episode, this shit is like nightmare fuel. We just see the ants raiding villages, picking people up, knocking them out, sometimes killing them and just bringing the corpses back to the queen. Sometimes they just get eaten or hunted for sport. Yeah, it just seems like a really shitty place to live. And part of what makes this arc really cool is that we see the ants, because they start consuming humans, become more individualistic. Ants are very hive oriented. That's how you get ant farms, and you have your worker ants and all that type of thing. In our world, you see right away that they're all starting to look very different, and they're kind of challenging each other and confronting each other. Even very early on, they're competing to see who can bring the queen the most food. And this scene with Colt's mom, where he has a chance to take her and a little kid, but ignores her, I thought was a great setup for his arc, because obviously you're starting to see pretty quickly that they do have some kind of remnant human emotions or memories. And it seems like the more intelligent they are, kind of the more of these memories they have. But they do say it's sort of hit and miss, and they don't really understand exactly why some of them have more memories than others. But this is a pretty good foreshadowing for his eventual abandonment of the ants, because he seems pretty conflicted about if he's more human or more ant. So you're almost getting like a little mini Tokyo Ghoul type arc in here from Colt, which is a really cool setup. And I think it really does well for the series that they have all these different factions within the ants. As they get more human and they behave more human, they create their own factions, they have their own goals. They kind of want to do their own thing and not just be controlled by the queen, which I think is a really smart thing to do. So you've got this massive conflict between the humans and ants, and then you've got a whole bunch of internal conflicts, both between the humans and between the ants, which is a really smart way to tell the story and really allows for you to expand a ton into all these characters. And then we find out more about this country too, because they don't allow any electronics. They're kind of hardcore Amish and one with nature and all that shit. So we see some characters from the first arc during the Hunter exam come back, and they're the first ones to get wind of it. And, you know, obviously this isn't going to bode well for them, which I respect the show for having the balls to follow through with all of this. Because I think a more shonen-friendly show or a more child-friendly show or a show that doesn't want to get too dark would have found ways for all these characters to survive. And this show's like, nah, fuck them.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
And we see that the Chimera ants can communicate telepathically, but as they evolve, they also start speaking out loud, which is a really neat thing to have as part of your evolution of your monsters. Like, they do a really good job making the monsters evolve and evolve very fast. Even the guy on screen, Chitu, he's instinctually pretty strong, but then as soon as they find out about Nen, they all start using it. They start getting their special moves. They all get really powerful really quickly, which is another great way to re-emphasize how much of a threat they are to humans. And you can see they want to start giving themselves names to call each other by. They notice the humans are using guns, so they start taking them because they're good killing tools. It makes them very human and very scary really quickly. I appreciate it because it easily could have dragged out for 15, 20 episodes where they're slowly evolving. You've got your protagonist trying to figure shit out. And I like that it just goes all in with it. They quickly adapt. And then people are starting to get wind of them pretty quickly.
Surprise, motherfucker.
So the conflict is imminent. So our main crew with Kite, Gon, and Kahlua arrives at the NGL. And they have to give up all their shit, which obviously, for storytelling purposes, is meant to make them be able to conceal the ants longer and to not communicate to outside help right away. But it also does kind of fuck them over because the ants are pretty developed by the time that help gets there. And even with the NGL's underground group that does use guns and make drugs and stuff, the Chimera ants don't give a shit. we see them get shot and they're just like, your weapons mean nothing.
I'm not just like the rest of you. I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better.
So the hunters have to come in. And Colt's interesting because he operates from a sense of efficiency and pragmatism for not just bringing the queen shitty food, but it also seems like he's conflicted about killing children. So he does find good excuses to put off killing the kids and be like, hey, you need to find stronger prey to feed the queen so that we can have a king. So he's a really interesting character just the whole time. So finally we get to see how the hunters compare to the ants. And our boy Pockle, who wasn't super strong, blows the heads off some of the lesser soldier ants. Again, the show has done a really good job through all the arcs of showing power levels so you understand right away where exactly everyone stands. We get a backstory episode for Gyro, who is like the leader of the NGL drug dealers and gun runners and all that. I didn't really care for this episode. I thought there'd be more to come from this, but it seems like he's just one of the intelligent ants that leaves the queen. I don't know if there's more to this later, but unless I just missed it, this all seems like an arc that started and then the author just changed his mind. So this episode for me was just kind of like meh. At least until we get to Pockle and Ponzu fighting the spider ant chimera, who's a total fucking weirdo. And then again, we get to see the power scaling because this spider just fucks Pockle up. And then we realize that he can see Nen. So the higher level intelligent chimera are intuitively using it, even if they're not aware of it yet. But this allows for Ponzu's murder by gun, and she gets her bees off to communicate to the outside since no one can use cell phones or anything, which is obviously very important for Kite and Gon and their crew to find out what's going on quickly. And obviously when they arrive and see the bullet shell casings, Kite is really smart and figures out right away what's going on.
Oh, good for you.
And he reiterates to Gon and Kahlua throughout this, you guys can stay with me as long as you're capable of defending yourselves. Otherwise, I'm booting your ass out, which is the smart thing to do. At the same time that's going on, the spider chimera reports back that there's these rare humans that are worth hundreds or thousands of a regular human. So now the ants are intrigued because they want to find the hunters and the Nen users, as they would obviously be more nutritious meals for the queen to give birth to a king. Kite, Gon, and Kahlua come across Ramot, one of the more intelligent chimera ants, and Kite is way stronger than him and can tell. So he tells Gon and Kahlua if they can't beat him, they have to leave. And obviously they beat his ass, but before they can kill him, Colt comes in and grabs him and flies away. And I really like all of this because their kind of hesitation to kill him, which Gon was told before they go there, he's going to have to be willing to kill, even though they're human-esque, is kind of what fucks them for the rest of this arc, or at least as far as I am, because this leads to Ramot showing all of the other ants how to see their Nen and how to use it and wield it. And then obviously once they figure it out, they develop it really quickly. And when Ramot reports back to Colt, he's talking about the revenge that he wants and how he wants to kill him and eat him. And then he kind of dimes out the other groups or squadrons for just killing humans for fun and not bringing them back to the queen for food. They're not actually using them. They're just killing them for sport, which Colt views as a waste. Again, kind of balancing that working for the queen and efficiency with his human sympathies. The next episode really starts to show the fracturing of the groups within the ants and Colt trying to hold it all together for the queen. And we see how they're developing a sadistic side, a lot of them. Some of them are just killing the humans for fun. We can see Yunju, who's this sort of centaur-looking ant, is enslaving the humans and torturing them and treating them like pets. We saw a pink koala earlier get pissed off that humans were looking down on him as like a kind of subspecies. And then you see how smart they are, where he tries to kill these guys in front of Kite, Gon, and Kahlua to antagonize them, to throw them off for their fight that they're about to have. I really enjoy this fight because they essentially let it be 3-on-3 with Kite taking the leader and Kahlua and Gon taking his two sidekicks. And we get to see that they're pretty strong, but at this point, Gon and Kahlua can still compete. But we know as the audience that these are kind of the lower level of intelligent ants, which shows us almost right away that Gon and Kahlua are completely overwhelmed strength-wise. There's also a good little lesson in here because Gon cuts his in half.
You got knocked the fuck out, man!
With his rock, paper, scissors. And then Kite has to step in and be like, you have to crush the head. So there's no getting around being nice to the ants. There's no getting around wounding them. Like, you gotta start fucking cracking skulls. As we get into the next episode, we see the chairman of the hunters getting a call. The stakes are being raised pretty quickly to where the hunters are having to send in their big guns. And we also get a nice breakdown here of the Chimera Ant structure, where you can see they need a king to start breeding new queens. And this will allow for exponential development and growth of their population. So their whole plan is to stop them before the king is born. Otherwise, they could grow really fast and completely out of control with no way to deal with it. Seems like a kind of Lord of the Rings inspired plan to win the fight before the main boss can get a body. Could just be a coincidence though. And obviously for this show, it doesn't play out that way anyway. And Gon and Kahlua letting Ramot escape, we get to see essentially the ants, once they're hit with a Nen attack one time, they can start to feel it and see it and control it rather than just using it intuitively. So Ramot is spreading this power to everyone. So they're powering up all their forces to be Nen users, which is obviously a problem for the hunters because they're vastly outnumbered to begin with. This scene annoyed me a little bit when it first started, where Kahlua, Gon, and Kite get surrounded by a bunch of ants, but they offer to duel them randomly one at a time instead of just overwhelming them with numbers.
Are you fucking retarded? The hell's the matter with you?
I end up being okay with it because I know you're supposed to see the ants wanting to individualize and not just be kind of cogs in the ant farm. And at the end of the day, Kite wipes them all out with one attack, so it wouldn't have really mattered anyway. But it functions fine enough as an excuse to give us some Gon and Kahlua fucking up some low-level intelligent ants. But I do like that Kite is using this as an information gathering time because he's like, okay, the captains and lower can be dealt with easily enough. And what we find out later is that the Royal Guard and up are the real fucking problem. And I'm not sure what to make of Kite's weapon. I like it that it has a lot of variety, but I don't really like the idea of randomized weapons. And then he can't get rid of it until he uses whatever technique with each weapon. As far as convenience and functionality, it doesn't really seem great. And it feels like there's a better way that he could have gone about using his abilities than kind of a random weapon generator. And this whole little arc that Pakal has is horrifying. He was able to fend off the paralysis enough to go hide in the dead bodies. This show does a really good job of having balls, because I think in most shows he would have found a way to escape and you get your kind of happier route. And this show undercuts that shit right away. And it's actually worse what happens to him than just dying. And we do get a little flash here of Hagya, where he sees Kite and he's like, we need to develop more before we can fight him. So they just kind of run away and they're just keeping an eye on him. So at least the ants aren't all just compulsive fucking idiots, which I think makes them scarier as monsters than just being feral beasts. So here's where we get introduced to one of the Queen's Royal Guards, Neferpitu, and we can see that she's a fucking problem. And I'm presuming she will continue to be this entire arc, but she's the one who finds Pakal and then he's just fucked. So she's poking around Pakal's brain and making him reveal all the information about Nen.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
He's essentially being forced to make her more powerful while being zombified, and then he's going to get fucking eaten. Just a brutal death for him. This is probably the creepiest part of the arc so far, where he's just being lobotomized and giving out all the information, and there is no escape, there's no hope. He's just fucking tortured and then eaten. It is a great introduction to a villain though, and then we get to see her expand on their knowledge and again help all the Chimera ants power up. Here's where things go south. Neferpitu can detect them from really far away, and she launches herself off the top of a cliff at Gon and Kahlua in the woods, but Kite sacrifices an arm. Gon goes into rage mode, but unlike a lesser show, Kahlua just knocks his fucking ass out and they run. He doesn't get the emotional power boost to win this fight, and then Neferpitu fucks Kite up off screen. Again, just a really good job of showing power, and that she just wrecks their shit pretty much with no effort. And this does also lead to a really interesting arc for Kahlua that I hadn't really picked up on in the first half of the show. He does say that you shouldn't pick fights that you're going to lose. And I think I just didn't notice, but every time they run into a strong opponent, he just flees the scene. The big three that got brought in here for the hunters kind of shit on him for it and call him a coward. Even though I think part of why I didn't notice is because it's been a pragmatic decision every time that he's done it. They've been so overmatched every time that he runs that they would have died or gotten really fucked up. And now you get kind of the problem you have with zombies, where if the people that they send in are weak, it's only going to create more ants for them to fight. So they really only need to send in strong fighters who can defend themselves. So now the chairman gives Gon and Kahlua a task where they have 1 month to beat these way more experienced hunters. Otherwise, they had to stay out of the fight altogether. As part of their training arc, we get introduced to Palm. We don't really know how strong she is, but she's good at locating people. Essentially, once she's seen them, she can just look at a crystal ball and see where they are. But she was an apprentice and has a crush on Nav, the guy with the glasses that was shitting all over Kahlua and Gon. But her ability to go reunite with Nav relies on Gon and Kahlua passing this test. And she's kind of a yandere thing going, where she threatens to kill them if they fail. She's always lurking around with a knife and shit. And she kind of looks like the girl from The Ring. So here's where we get Bisky coming back, and she's training them to be able to use different parts of their Nen for a long time. And she says that they can only go fight the guy Knuckles after they've been training for hours a day. So Gon goes into every fight exhausted. And Kahlua is the one who needs to fight Shoot, the other guy. Meanwhile, Moral, Nav, and Chairman Netero are trying to do guerrilla tactics and just pick off different forces and lessen the number of ants, because they think they have a certain amount of time before the king is born to get to the queen, but they realize that they can't just rush in because of how strong the royal guard is. So you kind of have these two simultaneous stories going where they're trying to feel each other out without really committing their forces. So you kind of have these two parallel stories going for a good bit of the part that I'm going to cover today. Gon and Kahlua are training, and then Gon's fighting Knuckles, and the ants are trying to figure out how exactly the humans are fighting back and trying to come up with a counter strategy to protect their queen long enough for her to give birth to the king. And despite his stupid pompadour hair, I actually like Knuckles a lot as a character. He's pretty strong, and he's got a pretty cool ability that he reveals at the end of this training arc. He's obviously very nice. He takes care of puppies. He doesn't just destroy Gon even though he could. He wants Gon and Kahlua to get stronger. So he's a solid good guy character. And in the meantime, Gon works on his rock, paper, scissors technique because it's obviously super slow and very obvious. And Moral is using smoke or fog to kind of pick off the chimeras, and then they use Nav's teleport ability to put them in a room with the chairman who's killing them. A pretty good strategy for three people just to take out unit after unit. Obviously, it's enough that the chimeras have noticed and it's making a dent. So we see Gon gradually get stronger as he fights. He tries to use his rock, paper, scissors as a feint, and he accidentally names it Jajankin, which Knuckles gives him credit for being a pretty cool name and explains it. And Gon's like, oh, that was actually a stutter. But it's cool to see him grow as he fights. I like the balance between Gon, who's pretty instinctual but still clever, and Kahlua, who's very calculated and planned out due to his background as an assassin. And we get a really good character moment in here too for Kahlua, where Bisky says that he's going to leave Gon to die one day because he's such a coward. And this is where he realizes that every time he has the chance to run, he just does. And he has to face up to need to be braver and fight even when it's not a 75 or 90% certainty that he's going to win. And for the final fight, Knuckles actually uses his full ability, which is pretty neat. It's a little Nen robot thing that just follows Gon around. And every 10 seconds, it adds 10% that it's taken from him in Nen. And then once the number on that machine gets higher than the Nen he has left, he can't use any Nen for a month, which is why Knuckles didn't do it to begin with, because then Gon couldn't have fought for a whole month. So again, just reinforcing how nice Knuckles is. And then we obviously get this whole big breakdown of Nen in numbers, which I don't mind, but I'm not really sure how much it helps. I thought numbers was very useful in Seven Deadly Sins because of how much they power scale, even though it goes way overboard by the end. Here, I'm not sure if it's necessary. It's fine to have. And we see Kahlua strengthen his resolve and attack Shoot, even though he keeps having this impulse to run and seeing his brother's face, which we find out there's more to later on than just trauma. And we finally get the birth of the king, Muriuum, and this was way before their anticipated timeline, so now you know everything's about to hit the fan. He wakes up and just starts killing his own guys. He's like, fuck you all, don't question me. And this is the final straw for the fracturing of the ants, because his premature birth is also going to kill the queen, so now they don't really have loyalty to anyone. Some choose to follow him, some choose to try to become their own kings. Also, as an aside, he's voiced by Shigaraki from My Hero Academia. Dude's a villain in a lot of shit. He's also in a lot of rom-coms, weirdly enough. Really good voice actor, though. And we see 3 of the royal guards pledge their loyalty to him, and they pretty much just say, fuck the queen, she's dying anyway. And he's one of those interesting villains where he's almost infantile in his understanding, but he's so powerful that it makes him dangerous. Kind of like the whole thing with baby snakes that are venomous compared to adult snakes that are venomous. because baby snakes don't know how much venom to use. So they'll just fucking unload. And we see him eat the brain of a kid. He's just brutal. Again, the show never stops with trying to hold back or anything. It's rough the whole way, which I appreciate. And the ants that got left behind say that he's pretty much a new species. So even though he ate Peggy and a couple of the other Chimera ants, he probably doesn't even view it as cannibalism because he's so different than them and so much more evolved. And it's at this point that Colt finishes the arc that was set up. He goes to Moral and Nav and explains that he wants them to save the queen and that they need to stop the king. But this is also really important information for them because now they know the king was already born. And this kind of seems to be laying the groundwork for some kind of peaceful ant-human relations. But obviously I don't know yet. I'm only about halfway through. And we get to see Gon, who's frustrated and acknowledges his own weakness, and they get left behind as Knuckles and Shoot go to help out the chairman and the main group inside the NGL. Human doctors try to save the queen, but they can't do it. She has too much damage. And something that I thought was pretty clever in here that they slipped in is Colt offers his own organs, and they explain that the ants evolved too fast and there would just be too many differences to even know if it could work to bother trying. And here's where we start to sort of wind down for the first big part of this arc. Shoot and Knuckles are there. They're trying to save Kite. Gon and Kahlua want to save Kite but can't go in yet. And we see that the ants that were the more rebellious ones have branched out and they're kind of heading to the outside world because they want to make their own kingdoms. Maroom heads over to East Gorto and decides that he's going to make the palace a meat factory at a ceremony that they're supposed to have in a couple weeks. And he pretty much just takes over with no resistance, obviously, and declares himself king.
'Cause fuck them, that's why.
Meanwhile, Gon preps and takes Palm on a date, which is amusing because she looks way different. Obviously, she looks much prettier and put together, and she's kind of easily won over by flattery. It is a bit weird because she's 22 and he's 12, but there's not anything really romantic about it. It kind of gets alluded to, and the episode ends with the narrator saying Gon 12 was dumped by Palm 22 without his own knowledge. Although I'm not sure how well that would fly today, or at least in the Western world, but I thought it was mostly pretty harmless. Just a little odd. And it turns out Gon's a little romantic and takes her to this firefly tree and gives her this plant that the firefly is attached to. So it lights up, and he's a nice little charmer.
Gotcha, bitch.
Meanwhile, Kahlua is getting the shit kicked out of him by Ramat, and he's fighting with himself to not run, which is why he's losing. And eventually he finds some kind of needle or parasite in his forehead that his brother had put there as a form of self-protection so that he couldn't just sacrifice himself on a whim or choose fights that he would lose. But Palm sees Nove, so she's like, suck it, Gon, and moves on. And Kahlua has, I think, maybe his most badass moment in the show, where he can finally fight Ramat and just rips his fucking head off before he can even realize what's happening. So obviously Kahlua got a power boost from all this, although his was more mental than physical. And Gon and Kahlua are being watched by Nove to decide whether or not they should be taken to the NGL for a couple of days. And obviously with Gon getting his shit together and being more positive and working out, they're going to get to come along finally to try to rescue Kite. We see Cheetu fight Moral and Knuckles. So you can see he's already pretty powerful. And he's so fast that he ends up escaping, which is obviously frustrating for them because Knuckles used his little interest Nen thing. But once he's outside of 100 meters, it doesn't matter. And we see Kite got rescued after Neferpitu's experimentation, but he's colossally fucked up and just hits Gon over and over. He's kind of like a mindless zombie. And eventually Gon hugs him, and he at least stops attacking. But if you start touching him, he'll attack you again. So he's not really any use, and mentally he's just destroyed. Kind of hoping he comes back to more normal, but we'll see, I guess. The show hasn't been afraid to be dark. Miriam is puppeting Diego, who's in charge of East Cortal, to invite everyone who lives there to the capital city for a big festival. And obviously this is where he's going to feast. And we see Gon is going to use his Jajankin on Moral, but holds back, and they decide that's enough. So presumably his rage boost is going to be enough to fuck up Neferpitu. Obviously I won't see that for a while probably. And then we get a couple episodes with the Phantom Troop that I enjoyed, but right now they just kind of seem like random. I'm hoping they come back into play as the arc goes on. But we get these 2 episodes where a handful of them are trying to protect Meteor City where they live from Zazan and the Spider Chimera and that little group that's spread out to there. And they go in and just fuck them up for the most part. And we get a little bit of fan service.
Well, there it is.
we see them wipe out the stronger end of the sentient ants, and they have a race to the queen, Zazin. And we do get actually a pretty important plot point here. Again, it hasn't been mentioned since, where we find out that Kaluto, who works for the Phantom Troop, is actually undercover looking for Kalua, and it's his sister. So that was a pretty big reveal, but not much has been done with it yet as far as I've seen. And we get to see a pretty cool ability from Phaeton, the little black-haired dude, where he goes rage mode and has this armor and just fucking blows up everything. And the whole Phantom Troop is like, oh shit, run. So he destroys Zazin even when she powers up. It's a fun little fight to watch. And we do get another dark part in here where Zazin, when he's using her tail to convert people, but it was kind of a fucked up conversion, and they're all begging for death. So the Phantom Troop's like, I don't want to do mercy killings, so I'll just come at me. And obviously the implication is they just kill all of them as a sort of mass euthanizing. I kind of wonder if this is what inspired Full Metal Alchemist with that very famous Chimera scene. And that's where I'm going to end this one. We end up with the Phantom Troop taking care of their hometown, or at least part of them. Hisaka, Kirapika, and Leorio are MIA, and then Gon and Kalua are trying to figure out how to get into the palace before this mass execution and feeding session for the Chimera. So yeah, really good first third of the arc. I'm so glad this show has teeth, and it's willing to take dark plot points to a logical conclusion, which is not always happy, but I think it really serves the show well as far as making it intense and often horrifying and sad, obviously, with things like Kite. And I think if you're not willing to go that route, you really lose a lot from the story and the stakes. And Hunter x Hunter has had pretty good follow through the entire way with just killing people, whether they've been relevant or not. So this video went way longer than I thought it would. This is why I wanted to break this up into thirds. So I'm going to wrap it up here. If you've seen the show, let me know what you think. I try to respond to the comments that aren't just insults. Like and subscribe and all that shit. Thanks. See ya.